Combat in this game is actually relatively complicated, so if you're a newer player and you're wondering what things like avoidance, pursuit, follow-up, and all of those different statuses do, that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Let's dive in. Alright, the first thing I want to point out is that NetEase has been putting in a lot of work improving the tooltips in this game. You can now click on any underlined text and the game will explain what exactly it does, but we'll still go ahead and talk about everything anyway because there's a few things that the game does not explain. We'll start things off talking about evasion, aka avoidance. I think every single source of evasion and avoidance has been streamlined to just say evade. However, for a while, evasion and avoidance were kind of used interchangeably. So when you have a stack of evasion, or in some cases, a set amount of time that your unit can evade attacks, that simply means that when they get attacked, sometimes they're just not going to take damage. This is an extremely powerful effect. Gil-galad is notably pretty infamous for having like the most powerful source of evasion in the game. However, there is a way to counter it, and that is with pursuit. So units that are under the effect of pursuit, or commanders that are under the effect of pursuit, just completely ignore whether or not an enemy has evasion/avoidance. So when you're fighting Gil-galad, for example, if he is skilling into his evasion skill, which he probably will, if you have pursuit, that means you can completely nullify that effect. Your units under the effect of pursuit will just ignore the evasion and hit through that normally. Next up, we have follow up. Follow up means that the unit has a chance of doing 2 normal attacks in that round of combat rather than just 1. And I do want to point out that with follow up, this does not stack. Multiple sources of follow up will not result in something, like 4 or 6 hits. You can only have 1 source of follow-up, so 2 attacks per round, like Convener being an example. Like if Witch King is running Convener and Morgul Herbalists, that will not be 4 attacks, that can only ever be 2 attacks. Speaking of Convener, we'll move on to talk about Initiative. Initiative is an extremely powerful effect that allows your army to act first regardless of the speed difference between your units and the enemy's units. Normally in a battle, the turn order is decided based on the unit's speed. When initiative is in play, if one army has initiative, they just always get to go first in those rounds of combat, no matter what. And if there's 2 sources of initiative in play, like let's say Gandalf is fighting the Witch King, they both have Convener, they both gain initiative from that. I believe at that point, the game does go back to speed as the tiebreaker, but if anybody knows for sure, please do feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section below. But I'm pretty sure it still uses speed as the tiebreaker for that one. Then there's another little effect that's not really like an effect like these other ones we've been talking about. It's just the on hit keyword. So for example, on Boromir's lower defenses, this says on hit and it affects the entire enemy army. There's a 50% chance to receive an additional 4.2% damage. So basically what this means is anytime one of the units gets attacked by one of your units, and that attack is successful, the attack obviously has to land on the target, there's a chance that they're going to take extra damage. And to the best of my knowledge, this on-hit effect is very slightly different than extra sources of damage. For example, on a Smite Carver, this just says after the commander performs a normal attack, there's a chance of dealing additional focus damage. What could technically happen with this is Gandalf, in this case, since he has the Carver, could initiate a normal attack on an enemy. The enemy could then evade that attack, but it won't matter because the smite could still go off. Whereas with on hit, if the target avoids the attack, I'm pretty sure that the extra damage just cannot happen. Next up, we'll talk about Stunned, Madness, and Silence. So, for example, Intimidation has a chance to stun the enemy commander. A stunned unit or commander cannot initiate normal attacks and cannot activate skills. One thing to know about Stunned and Silence is that, let's say, for example, this Dreadful Presence skill has a cooldown of 2 rounds. It means it goes off every 3rd round. if your commander is stunned during one of the rounds that this skill is supposed to go off, it does not go off, but it also does not go on cooldown. Your commander will then, in the next round of combat, say, oh, hey, my skill is off cooldown. Let me go ahead and use it. So you can't, quote unquote, like counter spell abilities in this game, but you can delay when those abilities are activated. And in some cases, you could basically get rid of one of the activations of that skill. You know, if it was going to go off again on round 10 and then that gets pushed back around, combat only lasts 10 rounds. So you can sort of cancel out abilities, but not really. Silence is similar to stun, except they can still normal attack. So stun is just a more powerful version of silence, but silence says you cannot activate skills if you are silenced. And then we'll talk about madness. Madness is an extremely powerful effect in this game. It says there's a 50% chance to confuse allies for enemies when initiating normal attacks or activating skills. So for anybody that's played Pokemon, this is like confusion in Pokemon. There's just a coin flip whenever you go to attack or activate a skill. If you're inflicted with madness, sometimes it's just going to go through like normal. You're going to hit the enemy. Sometimes you're going to turn to your homie and smack him in the face, and that's very unfortunate. There is one little interesting caveat. Actually, there's a few interesting caveats with madness. The first one being if there's only one stack left alive in your army. So let's say you have Galadriel and you're mono stacking cataphracts. So the only units you have in your entire army are cataphracts. If those cataphracts are inflicted with madness, there's a chance that they just won't attack. So if they get hit with the madness and they lose the coin flip, they're just going to stand still. It's going to say something in the combat log like no target in range. You know, cataphract is beset with madness, could not differentiate friend from foe, and then it's going to say no target in range. So a unit cannot attack itself, but if it's mad, it can just do nothing instead. So you can't mono stack and avoid madness in that way. You can kind of mitigate the effect because not dealing damage is better than dealing damage to your friend, but it's not like a way to be madness immune, quote unquote. The other interesting little caveat is for skills that have some duration. For example, Legolas and Gimli's Protect Elves skill. If, let's say, you have a madness commander and they have one of those commanders with like guardians and sentinels, if their guardians are hit with madness before they activate the Protect Elves skill, and your army has elves in it, there's a 50% chance that those guardians will actually protect your elves rather than protect their elves. And because that skill doesn't have a set duration, it just lasts the entire combat. For the entire combat, their guardians will protect your elves. It's one of the most crazy, lopsided fight things that can ever happen in this game. Pretty specific set of circumstances for it to happen, but do keep that in mind if you know that you're going to hit like a Gil-galad that has a trapper's hood with Hysteria on it. You might want to respec at least those couple of points, or else there's a chance that your guardians are just going to throw themselves in front of the enemy army and you're going to lose and just not kill anything ever. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.